And here's the guy. This is the guy. Eugene Delacroix. Eugene Delacroix, born in 1798, dies around about the same time as ENG, but 1798, he's nearly 20 years younger than ENG, putting him solidly in the new generation of romantics who are coming up in France. And so he was a French romantic artist and became sort of like the de facto leader of the French romantic movement. So that just makes him all the more irksome for uh, uh, ENG at this particular moment in time. He's known for, as most of the romantics that we've talked about are, his expressive brushstrokes and depiction of optical effects of color, influenced by the Mannerist and Baroque art, particularly their chaotic and asymmetrical compositions. And yeah, he was fierce rivals with ENG. ENG couldn't stand him. He couldn't stand ENG. They both had such different ideas about life, about art, about what France should look like and what it should be. They clashed, and the stories, if you ever have a chance to read anything about these two, it's fun stuff. Now, unlike ENG, who did not do these things, he actually traveled to Africa, Palestine, the Near East, and as such, his paintings are also considered Orientalist, but he was painting these emotion-filled interpretations of what he saw. And as such, there's a lot more sympathy that we can see in Delacroix's work that depicts things that happen in the Middle East or the Near East. So this is one of his paintings, Liberty Leading the People, from 1830. By 1830, there's yet another French Revolution that's happening. And the French people are rising again to take down the monarchy, make France a nation by the people for the people, right? And it just makes sense that a romantic would be drawn to this, right? Now, a lot of the same ideals were in place from the earlier French Revolution, but now it's a much more emotional revolution that's happening. And he paints this again as we talk about national pride. There's so much national pride. She is Lady Liberty here, carrying the flag, the French flag, right? By the way, Lady Liberty, she is a symbol of liberty. And so, yeah, that is the same Lady Liberty that we have as the Statue of Liberty in New York here in the United States, right? Who was, that particular statue was built or was designed by the studio of Eiffel, the same Eiffel who made the Eiffel Tower, who was French, right? It was a gift to the United States from the French. And so Lady Liberty, it's the same character, right? Lady Liberty. All right, so she's leading this group of people to fight, right? She's rousing us forward. Yes, she's also got her breasts out there, which I'm sure Delacroix would point out is meant to be like she's the mother of liberty, right? Whatever. But still, it's a woman with her breasts out. It is what it is. But as everyone's storming whatever they're about to go and fight, look at all the people who have already died, right? And the emotional sense of that, right? It's no longer what we saw happening in David's Oath of Hirate, where the women were swooning to one side. And that was indicative of what could happen to these soldiers. No, here it's happening. These people are dead. And the other people in the back are going to have to walk over them. They're not even like beautifully dead, like again, like David's painting that had the dead body almost looking like he had just fallen asleep. No, there's an indignity to the one guy who's had his pants taken off, right? These bodies are not like dignified, beautifully, just looking like they've fallen asleep bodies. So this is a call to action, but a call to action that doesn't try to prettify the fact that you could die by doing this. But again, what Delacroix is probably most known for are his paintings of exotic locations and people. Again, I put that exotic in quotations because it's what white European dudes would have found exotic at the time. But he actually traveled to these places. He didn't try to make it up. He didn't try to go by descriptions that he read. He traveled and went to these places and got to know the people that he met and learned their stories. And when he goes, you look at his sketchbooks and you see his watercolors, which, by the way, he was an amazing watercolorist. His watercolors are indicative, and his sketches are indicative of someone who genuinely is fascinated with a culture and wants to portray it truthfully and accurately. And so we get a piece like this, The Massacre at Chios, or Chios. I'm not entirely certain how to pronounce it. But what's being depicted here is a military attack by the Ottoman Empire on a Greek settlement by the name of Chios or Chios on April 11th of 1822. So he's only making this a couple of years after it actually happened. The campaign of these Ottomans coming into the area resulted in tens of thousands of deaths of the citizens of the region, and the forced deportation into slavery of almost everyone who did survive. So we have Delacroix painting this event with a weird amalgamation of insensitive Orientalism and sympathy. Because we see the plight of the people, right? Very similarly to what Goya did in the painting that we looked at. We are given these faces of all of these people who are suffering, who have been brought up here either to be murdered or to be sold into slavery, or perhaps to be raped, as this woman who's been tied up and is being pulled away. It's most likely her fate. And we're meant to sympathize with them, no doubt about it. We see their faces. We see the anguish. We see the absolute look of shock in this man's face. The nudity that is on display doesn't seem meant to titillate as much as it's meant to show these individuals as being vulnerable. So you can't help but sympathize with them. While the Ottomans are, for the most part, in shadow. Right? They don't seem to be receiving the same light that these individuals down here are receiving. And then we see the city burning in the distance and more violence being done upon people back here. And oh my God. And even one woman who's clearly dead, but a child is with this woman still trying to suckle at her teat. It is raw and it's emotional. And it doesn't try to hold back. And there's Orientalism here, yes, right? There's a fascination with the way people live in a quote unquote primitive society. There's a fascination with how they dress, the way that they battle and war with one another. But there's also this sympathy. He would have spent time amongst the people, getting to know people. This would have been something that would have angered him, and he's painting it because it angers him. It's that's that sympathy that comes through in a lot of his work. But it also doesn't change the fact that in some cases he would just paint things that were meant to excite the European 19th century white clientele who bought his paintings. Right? This painting here, no doubt, is based on actual observation of a lion hunt that would have happened somewhere that he traveled. Right? But the wildness of it and the swirling nature of the composition and the brush strokes, the very visible brush strokes that he puts down, is where the romanticism comes into play. And as I mentioned earlier, he took a lot of influence from the Baroque, particularly Northern Baroque. So somebody like Peter Paul Rubens here, who did paintings similar to this, right? And he's looking at the sort of chaotic, off-balanced compositions that Rubens would do, again, a good 200 years earlier, and he's painting things like this, very similar in style, but again, much more based on his own observations. Oh, but also, right, very romantic in the way that he's applying the paint. This doesn't look anything like what the neoclassicists were doing, right? So, I want to point out something. We looked at this painting here on the left, The Vow of Louis XIII by Jean-Auguste Dominique Eng, and we looked over here at the Massacre at Chios by Eugene Delacroix in 1824 as well. Both of them have been painted in 1824. And both of them got into the Salon that year. This is how the world is changing at this particular moment in time, or how France is changing anyway. So over here, again, you've got Eng. Over here, you've got Eugene Delacroix. And like I said, these two could not stand each other. And you can imagine how for Eng over here, who's finally being accepted into the Salon and getting his work displayed there. He's been a member of the Academy for quite some time at this point, but now he has made this very specific choice to go back to his neoclassical roots, and that's what finally gets him in. But also on the same walls in this exhibition is Delacroix over here with what he's got going on. And so you got this is me paraphrasing their arguments with one another, but you got Eng over here who's like what is this? What is this guy even doing? Like this young guy who doesn't even know how to paint. Look at the way he's painting. Like, what is that even supposed to be? And Delacroix, who's over here like, old man, what is your problem? Like, you're over there painting like a dusty relic from the past, right? Nobody cares about this crap that you're doing anymore. Or at the very least, all this stuff being based in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, it's been done to death, man. Would you knock it off and let this new generation come up and do our thing? Yeah, but like, look at you. Like, you don't know how to paint. Your composition is all over the place. You're all hung up in this hedonistic emotions, right? My stuff is calm and orderly, and that's how art should be. Would you just go ahead and die already, old man? Look, you're not relevant anymore. You think that you're relevant. You think this because finally the Academy has decided to throw you a bone, and I guess perhaps it was about your time, but man, you just need to go ahead and die so that all these artists and all these people who think like you can get out of the way, and we can turn this world into what we think it should be. You millennials are just ruining everything. Okay, boomer. Whatever you say, boomer. This is the kind of relationship these two had. They couldn't stand each other. They had this intense rivalry for one another. And it was because they were right here at this conjunction of two generations with, you could not have more opposite ideologies, who are where you're sitting here with ENG, who is the old guard about to die out, and Delacroix, who's the young, emotional guy, and his generation is coming up. And ENG is looking at that as if they're going to ruin it all. And Delacroix is looking up at ENG and his people like, if people like you would just go ahead and die already, we could make a much better world. And isn't it kind of interesting how, even though that was 200 years ago, we're having similar arguments now between the younger generations and the older generations, at least here in the United States, right? History repeats itself. We often think that these are new things that are happening, but they've happened before, and long after all of us who are watching, listening to this now are gone, there will still be these clashes between one generation who thinks things should be some way, who see a new generation and their new ideas as threatening. And we see it played out in the paintings of these two passionate artists. So let's look at a little bit of romantic music. So romantic music, if we're talking about the characteristics of romantic music, a few things we can hit on. Now, again, I don't claim to be a huge expert when it comes to music. And I'm much more knowledgeable when it comes to the art of the time. So I will give you these few things that we can look at or look for in romantic music and play you a few pieces, but I just won't be getting into it nearly as deeply as I did with the art. All right. So romantics, you can imagine, right? Everything's got to be emotional. So there starts to be this freedom of form and design, right? Which becomes both more personal and more emotional, because composers are starting to feel free to break away from the very stringent rules about how certain pieces should be composed. That fits in many ways with what's happening with the artists of the time. Then there are going to be these dramatic contrasts in dynamics and in pitch. There are chromatic harmonies and discords, right? We're not always necessarily looking for the music to perfectly harmonize. Then orchestras get even bigger, as there were new brass instruments, and the valve was developed during this time, and so the orchestra becomes even larger. There start to be woodwinds, brass instruments. Even more strings are brought in, and something that's referred to as program music. That's music that is specifically meant to tell a story from beginning to end. Become a thing. Emotional themes in music and nationalism, all that stuff, right? It's very similar to what we saw happening in the art of the time. So we'll listen to a few pieces. I will also include links to the videos with these musical selections in Google Classroom. This one here is Ludwig van Beethoven's Symphony No. 5. You've heard this. It won't be anything new. Now, and you can hear how that is meant to be evocative of certain emotions. Ludwig von Beethoven was the rock star of his time when it came to this. This is another piece of his from Symphony Number 9. It's Ode to Joy. Ode to Joy. It right there in the title. It is meant to evoke emotion. And lastly, we'll take a look at one of the late Romantic composers, Richard Wagner from Germany. And this particular piece, which you've no doubt heard at some point in your life, the Ride of the Valkyries from The Valkyrie. This piece is, again, an example of music that is meant to evoke an emotion, but also music that is meant to tell a story. In this case, the mythological Valkyries, these scary creatures, arriving, flying to their destination. So think about scary idea of these Valkyrie creatures arriving, right? Scary emotion. What does he give us? I mean, there's a reason why a lot of movies that are meant to be like spooky, Halloweeny kind of thing will have music that sound a bit like that even to this day. All right, and that is it for me. I know it was a ton of information, but again, this would have been a week if we were meeting in person, face to face, that I would have been teaching on both days, Tuesday and Thursday. That's the reason for the amount of material. Your quiz this week, quiz number 5, will be based purely on my material. You won't have anything from Professor McIntosh. All right. Yep, that's it. All right. Take care, everybody. I'll see you soon. Bye.